I heard them decide my fate through a door that was not fully closed. It was a fate, like all the others they had chosen for me, that was designed for their convenience, a solution to the problem of my existence. The problem was, quite simply, that I was still there. At 24 years of age, I was an unsold good, a piece of plain serviceable furniture that cluttered the drawing room and reminded my stepmother of her failure to marry me off. My younger sister Rosamond was the porcelain doll on the velvet tray, all gilded curls and cornflower blue eyes, destined for a brilliant match. I was the scuffed, leather-bound book with a difficult text, perpetually left on the shelf. But what earthly use could the Dowager Duchess have for Alara? My stepmother's voice was a blade of sharp, polished steel. She is asking for a companion, not a librarian's ghost. The girl has no conversation, no accomplishments to speak of. She is quiet, my father's voice rumbled, a sound of weary capitulation I knew well. The letter is quite specific. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood requires someone of quiet disposition and sober habits. It seems Alara's failings are, for once, her qualifications. There was a rustle of silk, a sigh of profound irritation. And the Duke? He is in residence, is he not? The Black Wolf of Blackwood, they call him. A man who has refused every eligible lady in the kingdom. It is unseemly to place Alara in his path. It is hopeless. What if he takes offence at the sight of her? I did not need to hear my father's reply. I knew its shape and texture. It would be a soft, formless sound of agreement, an acknowledgement that I was, indeed, an offence to the eye. I closed my own eyes and retreated from the door, the wood cool against my fingertips. I was not angry. Anger was a fire that required fuel, and my spirit had been fed on nothing but damp kindling for years. What I felt was a familiar hollow ache, the quiet resignation of a creature who has learned not to want. So I was to be sent away, packed up and posted to Blackwood Manor like a parcel, a temporary solution until Rosamond's glorious wedding to some lord or other would finally secure the family's finances and render me, if not invisible, at least someone else's distant problem. End of Fime. I went to my room and began to fold my few grey and brown dresses, my hands moving with a practiced, emotionless efficiency. I was an expert in the art of making myself small, of taking up as little space as possible. It was a skill I imagined would be most welcome at Blackwood. The journey north was a jolting, lonely affair that mirrored the state of my soul. The soft, rolling hills of my home county gave way to stark, windswept moorland, vast and beautiful in its desolation. Blackwood Manor rose from the landscape, not as a house, but as a geological formation, a fortress of grey stone that seemed to have wrestled the sky for its place on the earth. It was a place of shadows and secrets crowned with crenellations that bit at the clouds. It was, I thought, with a flicker of dry humour, the perfect setting for a librarian's ghost. I was received, not by the Dowager Duchess, but by a severe-looking housekeeper whose keys jangled like a jailer's. I was shown to a room in a quiet wing of the house, a chamber that was grander than any I had ever slept in, yet possessed a profound and echoing coldness. The tapestry on the wall depicted a grim-faced hunter and a dying stag, and I felt a strange kinship with the latter. For 3 days I saw no one but the maid who brought my meals. I read the books I had brought. I walked the prescribed length of the corridor, outside my door, and I waited. I was well practiced in waiting. It was the primary occupation of an unmarried woman of no fortune. On the 4th day I was summoned, not to the Dowager's private apartments, as I had expected, but to the library. The library was the heart of the house. It was a cathedral of knowledge, 2 stories high, with towering shelves of mahogany that smelled of leather and thyme and beeswax. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to stand in, casting a warm, flickering light on thousands of spines. Long, slanted ribbons of light fell from the arched windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust. For the first time since my arrival, a genuine, unbidden feeling stirred within me. It was not joy, precisely, but a kind of homecoming, a key turning in a lock I had not known was there. He was standing with his back to me, staring into the flames. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that it was him, the Duke of Blackwood. He was taller than I had imagined, his shoulders broad beneath a perfectly tailored coat of black wool. He did not move as I entered, and I stood awkwardly by the door, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles were white. "The housekeeper," Mrs. Gable cleared her throat. "Your Grace, this is Miss Ilara Croft, the companion for the Dowager Duchess." He turned, slowly. My stepmother's words echoed in my mind. The Black Wolf of Blackwood. The moniker was apt. He was not handsome in the way of the London dandies Rosamond so admired. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, a face carved from the same granite as his home. His hair was dark, his eyes a startling, piercing grey, the colour of the North Sea before a storm. They were eyes that held no warmth, only a deep, weary intelligence, and a grief so profound it seemed to have become part of his physical structure. He was a man encased in ice. His gaze swept over me. Not a glance, not the polite sweep of a gentleman acknowledging a lady's presence, but a direct, analytical assessment that missed nothing. It was the kind of look one might give a horse one was considering buying, or a column of figures one needed to balance. I felt myself shrink under its weight, my plain brown dress and my unremarkable face suddenly feeling like a beggar's rags. "You are not what I was led to expect," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but utterly devoid of inflection. I found my own voice, a small, thin thing. "I do not believe anyone has ever expected me, Your Grace. I generally arrive as a surprise, and rarely a pleasant one." The words were out before I could stop them, a shard of my private, ironic humour escaping into this grand, serious room. Thick. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his features. It was too quick to name. The ice remained, but I had the distinct impression that I had tapped it with a small, sharp stone. He did not smile. I did not think he was a man who smiled, often, if at all, but the focus of his gaze shifted. It was no longer an assessment. It was a look of genuine, focused attention. He was seeing me, Ilara Croft, the girl behind the plain facade, the mind behind the quiet lips. It was unnerving. It was terrifying. And it was the first time in my life anyone had ever looked at me that way. That single, unsettling moment was the beginning. My duties as a companion to the Dowager Duchess were surprisingly light. Her Grace, a woman with eyes as sharp as her grandson's and a tongue twice as tart, required me only to read to her in the afternoons and to lose to her at cards in the evenings. She was a formidable presence, wrapped in lace and jet beads, but her gaze often held a calculating glint that made me feel like a pawn in a game whose rules I did not understand. She spoke of her grandson rarely, and always with a mixture of exasperation and a deep, abiding sorrow. "Alistair has forgotten how to live," she said to me once, her fingers pausing on a playing card. "He guards his heart as if it were the last crown jewel." It was the Duke himself who became the unexpected centre of my new existence. He did not seek me out, not in any way that society would recognize as courtship. Instead, he simply appeared. I would retreat to the library, my only true sanctuary in that vast, echoing house, and I would find him there. He would be seated in a worn leather armchair by the fire, a book open on his lap, though I rarely saw him turn a page. At first we sat in silence, a man and a woman occupying the same cavernous space, separated by 20 feet of carpet and an impassable chasm of rank and circumstance. Then, one day, he spoke. I was reaching for a volume of Virgil on a high shelf, my fingers just brushing the spine. "The second edition," his low voice came from behind me, startling me so that I nearly lost my balance. "The printing is superior, but I find the translator's notes in the first edition to be more insightful." I turned, my hand still outstretched. "I would not know." "Your Grace, our library at home consists mostly of my father's ledgers and my stepmother's fashion periodicals." He walked to the shelf beside me and retrieved a different volume, its leather soft with age. He held it out to me. "The first edition," he said simply. Our fingers brushed as I took the book from him. It was a fleeting, inconsequential touch, yet a strange heat bloomed in my chest, a sudden, sharp awareness of his proximity. He smelled of old paper and winter air. I stood there, holding the book like a sacred relic, my heart hammering against my ribs for no reason I could name. That conversation, as brief and academic as it was, opened a door. Our silences became less frequent, replaced by quiet discussions. We spoke of books, of history, of philosophy. I learned that the mind behind his severe expression was sharp and curious, weighed down by duty but not dulled by it. He spoke of his lands, of new methods of crop rotation and animal husbandry, with a passion that was otherwise absent from his demeanor. In these moments, the ice around him would thin, and I would see a glimpse of the man beneath the title, a man who cared deeply for the legacy in his charge. He, in turn, began to ask me questions. Not about my family or my prospects, the usual currency of social interaction, but about my thoughts. What did I think of Tacitus? Did I believe Rousseau's theories on education were practical? He listened to my answers, his grey eyes fixed on my face, with that same unnerving intensity I had seen on our first day. He made me feel as though my opinions, which had been dismissed and ignored my entire life, were things of actual weight and value. It was a heady, dangerous sensation, like drinking wine for the first time. One blustery afternoon, I was huddled in a window seat, trying to read, but the draught was relentless. My shawl was a thin, worn thing of grey wool, offering little comfort. I must have shivered, though I was not aware of it. The Duke was across the room, seemingly engrossed in estate papers. The next evening, when I returned to my room, a parcel was lying on my bed. Inside was a shawl of the softest cashmere, the colour of cream, so warm and light it felt like a cloud. The accompanying note was from the housekeeper, stating that it was from the household stores. For the comfort of the dowager's companion, I knew it was from him. Mrs. Gable would never have made such a presumption on her own. I wore the shawl to the library that evening. He looked up when I entered, his eyes going to the cream-coloured cashmere around my shoulders. He said nothing. He did not have to. It was a silent, secret communication, an act of kindness, so subtle it could be denied, yet so specific it could only have come from him. Kindness from my family had always come with invisible invoices, a debt of gratitude I was expected to repay. This felt different. It was a gift, freely given, that asked for nothing in return. It terrified me more than any cruelty ever had. The slow, quiet rhythm of our days continued, each one a small, careful step into uncharted territory. We walked in the gardens, the dowager trailing behind us with her lady's maid, her sharp eyes missing nothing. He would point out a rare species of rose his mother had planted, his voice softening with a memory. I would speak of the wildflowers that grew in the meadows back home, and he would listen as if I were describing the gardens of Babylon. The moment that changed everything came, as all our moments did, in the quiet sanctuary of the library. We were discussing a passage in Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic Emperor's meditations on duty and fate. "It is a lonely philosophy," I remarked, tracing the words on the page, "to accept all that happens without complaint, to master one's own soul in isolation. Some of us are given no other choice," he said, his voice lower than usual. He was standing near the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantelpiece. The firelight carved his face into stark relief, deepening the shadows beneath his eyes. "Perhaps," I ventured, my heart beginning a slow, heavy beat. But even an emperor had friends. No one is meant to be an island. He looked at me then, a long, searching look that seemed to travel the entire length of my life, seeing all the quiet rooms, all the closed doors, all the unheard thoughts. "Miss Croft," he said, the formal address sounding strange and stilted after the intimacy of our conversations. "I find myself weary of formalities between us. I would be honoured if you would consent to call me Alistair." The name fell into the silent room like a stone into a deep well. To use his Christian name was a breach of every rule of propriety, an act of familiarity so profound it was almost a declaration. It was an invitation across the chasm that separated a duke from a penniless companion. "Alistair," I whispered, testing the shape of it on my tongue. It felt both foreign and deeply familiar. "Alara," he responded, and the way he said my name was a revelation. He did not say it with the flat resignation of my father or the dismissive sigh of my stepmother. He said it as if it were a beautiful, precious thing he had just discovered, a word he had been waiting to speak. In that moment, surrounded by the silent witness of 1,000 books, something shifted irrevocably between us. The ice did not just thin, it cracked. This fragile new world we had built, a world of shared thoughts and quiet understanding, was shattered by a letter from home. It arrived on a silver tray, my father's untidy scrawl, a jarring intrusion into the ordered elegance of Blackwood. I took it to my room to read, a sense of foreboding coiling in my stomach. His letters were rare and never brought good news. The cheap paper felt brittle in my hands as I broke the seal. The words inside were worse than anything I could have imagined. They were not the words of a father to a daughter, but of a desperate merchant outlining the terms of a sordid transaction. He wrote of debts, of my brother's gambling, of financial ruin that had been looming for years. And then, the final, devastating blow. Our family owed a staggering sum of money, not just to anyone, but to the Blackwood estate. A debt that had been passed down from the previous Duke, Alistair's father. My presence at Blackwood was not a kindness from a distant dowager. It was a negotiation. I was not a companion. I was collateral, a living, breathing piece of property offered up in a last desperate attempt to settle an account. The dowager's peculiar request for a quiet companion. My family's haste to send me away. It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a prison door locking shut. I was being vetted, assessed, asked, waxed. If the Duke found me tolerable, if he could be persuaded into a marriage no one else would want, the debt would be forgiven. The cashmere shawl, which had been draped over the chair, now seemed to mock me. His kindness, his attention, the intimacy of his name on my lips, had it all been a lie? A calculated part of the appraisal? Was he merely inspecting the goods before purchase? A wave of nausea and shame washed over me so profound I had to sit down, the letter crumpling in my fist. I had been a fool. A naive, romantic fool, to believe that a man like the Duke of Blackwood could see anything of value in a woman like me. He had not been looking at my mind, he had been calculating my cost. I did not weep. The hurt was too deep, too cold for tears. It was a shard of ice, lodging itself in my heart. I folded the letter with precise, shaking hands and placed it in my pocket. I would not cower in my room. I would not allow them the satisfaction of my silent retreat. I had been treated as a commodity my entire life, but I would not be a passive one. I would face him. I found him, as I knew I would, in the library. He was standing by the tall windows, looking out at the rain-swept gardens. He turned as I entered, a rare, small smile touching his lips. The sight of it was like a physical blow. "Elara," he began. "Do not use my name," I said, and my voice was a stranger's, cold and brittle. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of confusion and concern. "What is it?" "What has happened?" he asked, taking a step toward me. I held up a hand to stop him. "I received a letter from my father today. It was most illuminating." He explained the precise terms of my employment here. I watched his face, searching for any sign of guilt or surprise. I found only a sudden, guarded stillness. The ice was back, thicker and more impenetrable than ever. "I see," he said, his voice flat. "Do you?" I shot back, my composure cracking. "Do you see how it feels to discover that you are not a guest but a pawn? That every conversation, every shared moment, was not a meeting of minds, but an auction? Tell me, Your Grace, have you decided my value yet? Am I worth the price of my family's debt?" He visibly flinched, as if I had struck him. He did not deny it. He did not offer excuses. He simply stood there, absorbing my words, his grey eyes dark, with an emotion I could not read. "Yes," he said finally, The admission quiet but clear. I knew about the debt. The word hung in the air between us, a final confirmation of my humiliation. I felt the last of my foolish hope wither and die. My grandmother's plan was unsubtle, he continued, his voice low and strained. She believed two problems could be solved, with one rather medieval solution: your father's desperation, and what she perceives as my isolation. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a duke, but a desperately weary man. The debt was a catastrophe I was meant to manage. Everything else, he paused, his gaze unwavering, everything else was a complication I did not plan for. His words were meant to be a comfort, I think, but they only fueled my anger. A complication? Is that what I am to you? An unexpected variable in your calculations? No, he said, and his voice was raw. You are the one thing that makes sense in this damnable house. You are the only person I have spoken to in 5 years who has not wanted something from me, who has not looked at me and seen only a title and a vault of gold. He took another step forward, and this time I did not stop him. Do you truly believe the last few weeks have been a performance? Do you think I am capable of feigning an interest in Tacitus for the sake of a financial agreement? Before I could answer, before I could retreat back into the cold shell of my anger, he turned and walked to the large mahogany desk that dominated one corner of the room. He unlocked a drawer and took out a sheaf of papers tied with a ribbon. He did not hand them to me. He laid them on the table between us. I am not a fool, Ilara. I knew my grandmother's scheme was as cruel to you as it was insulting to me. I also know my duty to this estate. Your father's debt was a legal reality. He gestured to the papers. These are the new terms. I had my solicitor draw them up last week. The debt has been restructured into a loan, with lenient terms, to be paid back over 30 years. It is now a simple business matter between the Blackwood estate and your father. It has nothing whatsoever to do with you. I stared at the documents at the date scribbled at the bottom. It was from 5 days ago, 5 days before my father's letter had arrived. He had done this before he knew that I knew. He had severed the chain that bound me to this arrangement. Quietly and without fanfare, he had set me free. I looked up at him, my throat tight. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a fragile, trembling confusion. Why? I whispered. He finally closed the distance between us. Standing so close, I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Because I could not bear the thought of you feeling owned, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Because the first time you spoke to me in this room, you did so without fear and without flattery. And you woke me from a sleep I did not even realize I was in. For 5 years, since my brother died, this house has been a mausoleum. I have been its curator. Then you arrived, and you brought the quiet back to life. You filled the silence not with noise, but with thought. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gently finger the edge of the cashmere shawl I still wore. I cannot imagine this library without you in it, he confessed, his proud, severe face etched with a vulnerability that stole my breath. I will not force you to stay. You are free to go, with my deepest apologies for the position my family put you in. But I am asking you, Ilara. I am asking you to stay. Not as a companion, not as part of a bargain, but as you. I looked into his eyes, the stormy grey now clear and deep, and I saw the truth. I saw the lonely, honourable man trapped inside the Duke. He had seen me when no one else had bothered to look, and in turn, I had seen him. The world had tried to make us into a transaction, but we had become a conversation instead. I will stay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And in the quiet warmth of that grand library, with the rain lashing against the windows, we began to build a new world, not on the foundations of debt and duty, but on the fragile, hopeful ground of a shared understanding. We were no longer two separate problems to be solved. We were an alliance. News of the settled debt, communicated in the driest possible terms by Alistair's solicitor, must have thrown my family into a state of profound confusion. My father, no doubt relieved, was likely content to ask no questions. My stepmother, however, was not a woman to leave a stone unturned, especially if she suspected a jewel might lie beneath it. Her ambition, temporarily thwarted, reasserted itself with the force of a tidal wave. When a letter arrived, not for me, but for the Dowager Duchess, announcing their intention to visit Blackwood Manor to express their gratitude in person. Gratitude! The Dowager sniffed, tapping the letter with a bony finger as we sat in her private drawing room. They smell a wedding. And they are coming to ensure the correct daughter is the bride. Her sharp eyes met mine over her teacup. Your stepmother will not be pleased to find you so well established, my dear. Alistair, who had joined us for tea, set his cup down with a decisive click. Then it is time we made your position incontrovertible. He looked at me, his expression serious. They will attempt to dismiss you, to belittle you. We will not allow it. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. We were a we. The word settled in my heart, a warm and solid weight. The day of their arrival, the air in the manor was thick with tension. I dressed with care, not in my usual drab brown, but in a simple gown of deep forest green that Alistair's mother had worn, a gift from the Dowager that morning. It fit as if made for me, and for the first time, looking in the mirror, I did not see a plain, forgettable girl. I saw a woman who belonged. We received them in the great hall, a cavernous space designed to intimidate. Alistair stood beside me, a silent, formidable presence. The Dowager was seated in a high-backed chair like a queen upon her throne. My father entered first, looking small and overwhelmed by the grandeur. My stepmother followed, her eyes sweeping the room, calculating and assessing. And behind them was Rosamond, a vision in pale blue silk, her beauty as radiant and effortless as ever. My stepmother's eyes landed on me, standing beside the Duke, and her brittle smile faltered. She saw my dress, she saw the quiet confidence in my posture, and a flicker of fury ignited in her gaze. She recovered quickly, gliding forward with her hand outstretched to Alistair. "Your Grace," she cooed, "we are so overcome by your generosity. We have come to thank you properly for your understanding. In our recent financial difficulties," her gaze slid to me, dripping with condescension, "and to retrieve Alara, of course. Her time as a companion is at an end, and we could not impose on your hospitality a moment longer. She is a simple girl, quite unsuited to such a grand environment. On the contrary, madam," Alistair's voice was like chips of ice, "Miss Croft is perfectly suited to Blackwood. She is not here as a companion. She is here as my guest." My stepmother's smile tightened. This was not going according to her script. She decided to force the issue. "But surely you can see," she exclaimed, her voice rising with theatrical desperation as she gestured toward Rosamond, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "My Rosamond would make a far more fitting duchess. A diamond for a duke's coronet, not a common field stone." The insult hung in the charged silence of the hall. I felt a flush of the old familiar shame, but it was distant now, a phantom pain. I looked at my stepmother's grasping, desperate face, and I felt not anger, but a profound pity. Her entire world was built on surfaces, on beauty and bargains, and she could not comprehend anything of real substance. Before Alistair could unleash the cold fury I saw gathering in his eyes, I took a step forward. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it carried in the echoing space. "I am not a stone to be weighed and valued, stepmother. Nor is my sister a diamond to be sold to the highest bidder." I looked at Rosamond, whose blue eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and, I thought, a glimmer of admiration. "My worth is not something that is in your power to grant or to take away." I turned my gaze back to the woman who had spent a decade trying to make me feel worthless. "Happy here at Blackwood, I have been seen for who I am, not for what I am not, and I have accepted His Grace's invitation to remain. This is my home now." It was a declaration of independence I had never imagined I would be capable of making. The power of it resonated through me, a quiet, unshakable strength. My stepmother stared at me, speechless, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. Her plan was in ruins. She had played her final, most valuable card, and it had been refused. Alistair sealed her defeat. End. He moved to the great table in the centre of the hall, where a folder lay waiting. As to the matter of the debt, he announced to my father, his tone leaving no room for argument, it has been legally and formally settled as a long-term loan. Its terms are generous, but they are binding. They are also entirely separate from any personal matters. Miss Croft's presence here has no bearing on them whatsoever. He slid the documents across the polished wood. I suggest you study them carefully. Blackwood's solicitors are notoriously thorough. The defeat was absolute. Whoa, ka. My father, pale and sweating, could only nod mutely. My stepmother's social ambition had crashed against the unbreachable wall of the Duke of Blackwood's will and shattered. She had come to trade one daughter for another, and had left with nothing but a mountain of debt and public humiliation. They were ushered out by a stony-faced Mrs. Gable, a silent, ignominious retreat. Rosamond cast one backward glance at me, a look I could not quite decipher, and then she was gone. The great doors of the hall boomed shut, and silence descended. The Dowager Duchess rose from her chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her wrinkled face. "Well," she declared, "that was rather more entertaining than cards." With a nod to us both, she swept from the room, leaving Alistair and me alone. He came to me, his eyes searching my face. "Are you all right?" "I am," I said, and the wonder of it was that it was true. "I am more than all right." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "You were magnificent." He led me from the hall, through the quiet corridors of the house, and out into the gardens. The rain had passed, and the evening air was cool and clean, smelling of wet earth and stone. The last light of the sun painted the clouds in shades of rose and violet. We walked to a stone balustrade that overlooked the wild expanse of the moors. We stood in silence for a long time, simply breathing in the peace. The tension of the day, of the past weeks, of a lifetime of feeling invisible, slowly uncoiled within me. He turned to face me, his hands still holding mine. The grey of his eyes seemed to have captured the soft light of the twilight sky. "Ilara," he said, his voice husky, "when I asked you to stay, I was not entirely honest. I do not just want you to stay. I want you to stay with me. As my friend, as my intellectual partner, as my Duchess, as my wife." The words were simple, direct, and more beautiful than any poetry I had ever read. My heart, which I had guarded for so long, felt as if it might burst. "My home was not this castle," he continued, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "It was a fortress, cold, empty, and secure. You walked in and demolished the walls without ever raising your voice. You have unmade me, Ilara Croft, and put me back together as a better man." Tears I had refused to shed in my shame now fell freely in my joy. I could not speak. I could only nod, a slow and deep and shaking affirmation, a slow smile, the first true, unguarded smile I had ever seen from him, transformed his severe face, making him younger, handsomer than any man I had ever known. He lifted his hand to cup my cheek, his touch gentle, reverent, and then he lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a kiss of polite society. It was a kiss of homecoming, a kiss that spoke of long-held grief and new-found hope, of silent conversations and a future waiting to be written. It was the closing of one chapter of my life and the breathtaking, beautiful beginning of another. In the arms of the Black Wolf of Blackwood, the librarian's ghost had finally found her home. 3 months later, we were married in the small, ancient chapel on the Blackwood grounds. It was a quiet ceremony, attended only by the Dowager, a few trusted servants, and a distant, kind cousin of Alistair's, who stood as my witness. I wore the green dress, and in my hands I carried not a bouquet of hothouse flowers, but a simple clutch of heather gathered from the moors. The library, our sanctuary, was filled with flowers that day, and the fire roared in the hearth, a warm and welcoming heart. Our life together settled into a rhythm as comfortable and steady as a beloved poem. Our days were filled with books and laughter, with long walks on the moors where he would tell me the names of the stars, and quiet evenings by the fire where we would read aloud to one another. He was not just my husband, he was the other half of my own soul. A letter came from Rosamond. Her handwriting, so much like her, was a beautiful looping script. She wrote to apologize for her part in our mother's schemes, and to tell me she had broken off her engagement to the wealthy but cruel viscount her mother had chosen. She had instead accepted the proposal of a local squire, a man of modest means but good character, whom she truly loved. She wrote that, watching me speak my truth in the great hall had given her the courage to seek her own. I was happy for her. We had never been close, two girls raised to be rivals, but I hoped now that we could, perhaps, become sisters. The Dowager Duchess watched us with hawk-like satisfaction, her gambit having succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. I knew he needed a mind to match his own, not another pretty fool, she told me one afternoon, snapping a thread on her embroidery. I simply provided the opportunity. The rest, my dear, you did yourselves, and so my story found its happy ending. It was not a grand dramatic tale, but a quiet one. It was the story of a girl who was considered nothing, who found she was everything to someone. It was a story about the profound power of being truly seen. It is a lesson I carry with me every day, in the warmth of my husband's hand, in the weight of a good book in my lap, in the steady, peaceful beating of my own happy heart. Have you ever waited for words that were slow to come, or perhaps found a home in the most unexpected of places? Let me know in the comments below which part of this journey resonated with you the most. It's a reminder, I think, that true worth isn't found in the gilded mirrors of society, but in the quiet recognition of a kindred spirit. The greatest love stories are not always the loudest, but the ones that are whispered in libraries and spoken in silent understanding glances. If you enjoyed our story, please do consider leaving a like, and perhaps share it with someone else who might find a little piece of their own heart within these words. Be sure to subscribe for more stories of love that blossoms in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for spending this time with us. I shall see you in the next one.